solving quadratic equations. So you're heading for today is solving quadratic equations, lesson 5.1, and as I always encourage you to do, I would include today's date so that your notes are organized, okay? Your heading is solving quadratic equations, lesson 5.1, and be sure and include today's date. Now, listen to me very carefully. I will talk slowly. Listen. Let me start off by saying it is very important for you students, to be able to recognize quadratic equations and differentiate them from other types of equations. Very important. If you are given a group of equations and there's quadratics in there and linear and absolute value and different equations, you need to be able to recognize quadratic equations, or for that matter, linear equations or any other equation we have studied so far. So because of this, let's start off by studying what makes an equation a quadratic equation. Alright? Here we go. Write this equation down if you would, please. Write this equation down, please. And also write this equation down. And lastly, this equation right here. Write this down, please. Now, all of these equations are quadratic equations. Let me explain why. Please watch carefully. Anytime you have an equation, I really should have typed this sentence for you and I apologize for not. So go ahead and copy this down, okay? A quadratic equation exists. Are you ready? When the highest exponent, write this down please, when the highest exponent of a variable is 2. When the highest exponent of a variable is 2. Now, I can add more stuff to this. Technically, that would be correct. For example, you cannot have irrational coefficients. You cannot have negative exponents. But that's for another time, another day, another place, at a higher level of math. For Algebra 2 right now, I'm simply going to say you have a quadratic equation when the highest exponent of a variable is 2. See this variable here? A variable means a letter. Please don't forget that, okay? A variable just means a letter, alright? So when the highest exponent of a letter is 2, that's when you have a quadratic, okay? It has to be a 2. You cannot have a 3 or 4. But the highest it can be is a 2. And you have to have a 2. Look at this x. It has a power of 2. And you say, Mr. Error, this x here has a power of 1. I know. And so does this one. Even though you can't see that, I know that. But that's okay. All that I have said is that your highest exponent has to be a 2. I didn't say you can't have less than 2. So this is a quadratic equation because your highest exponent of a variable is 2. Look at this one. What is the highest exponent that you see of a variable? 2. That's a quadratic equation. This would not be a quadratic equation. X squared, and you might want to write this down, it's up to you, plus 3x cubed equals 5. Because that's supposed to be a 3, guys, sorry. Because in this equation, what's your highest variable of an exponent? 3. You don't need to know this now, but it's called a cubic equation, okay? Cubic. So you have a quadratic equation when the highest exponent of a variable is 2. Now you say, Mr. Earhart, fine, but you made a mistake. Now guys, not remember this from Algebra 1, but when you have a binomial, a two-termer times a two-termer, you take your x right here and you multiply it through. X times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. Then you take this 2 and multiply it through. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And look what you have, guys. Look at that. Your highest exponent of a variable is 2. Now, you do not need to know this yet. I'm not going to give you problems like this yet, okay? So if you've forgotten how to multiply a binomial times a binomial, don't sweat it. Don't worry about it, okay? I'm just trying to show you why this would be a quadratic. We're not going to solve any equations today that are like this. Okay, they're going to be simple equations today. How about this one over here, guys? Look at this. This looks like I've made a mistake here, but actually I haven't. X plus 2 squared means, right, x plus 2 how many times? 2 times. And then multiply your x through. X times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. 2 times x is 2x. And 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. Now look, guys. Your highest exponent of a variable is 2. Okay, right there. Your exponent here is a 1. And your exponent here is a 1. Okay? So your highest power is a 2. So guys, understand how to recognize quadratic equations. Alright, let's move on. Okay, now understand that lesson 5.1. I'm gonna go back to whispering. Sorry guys, I'm trying to talk. And my voice is doing better actually, but still, I think I'll just stick with whispering. Okay, here we go. Now, understand that lesson 5.1 starts off easy. Like any first lesson in a chapter would, okay? A normal first lesson in a chapter is easy. However, as we progress throughout this chapter, the material will get much difficult. So, or I guess grammatically I should say much more difficult. One thing that will really help you do well is to not get behind for 1 second of one lesson, okay? That would really help to not get behind, okay? Alright guys, I mean there's nothing more to say except let's solve some quadratic equations, so here we go. I'm going to give you 5 steps for solving quadratic equations. Now understand we're starting off easy today. These steps will change later as we get into more and more difficult equations. Now, I'm going to put these 5 steps up here, guys. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to kind of go back and forth between talking normally and whispering, okay? So I hope that's okay. Because to be honest, as my voice improves, it's almost harder to whisper than not talk, okay? So I'll go back and forth. Okay, like usual, I'm going to put these 5 steps up very quickly, okay? You're supposed to not be able to stay up with me. Just pause the video and copy them down, okay? Here we go. Step 1, simplify both sides of the equation. Step 2, this is optional. You don't have to do this. Eliminate fractions if this is something you like to do. Personally, for me, I like to get rid of fractions. Okay, that's me. Okay, moving on. Number 3. Move all x squared terms to one side and all other terms to the other side. Okay? Step 4. Divide by the x squared coefficient. Okay? Divide by the x squared coefficient. Lastly, take the square root of both sides. Take the square root of both sides. Okay? Alright, now, if you need to, pause the video. That's totally fine. And copy this down. I'm going to move on. We're going to look at 4 examples and we'll be finished. Today's material really is not that difficult at all. If you'll just use these steps. Okay, guys? But, you've got to pay attention and work hard still, but it's really not that difficult. Alright, here we go. First problem. 3x squared equals 21. Now, step 1. Simplify both sides of the equation. Can you simplify 3x squared? Absolutely not. Can you simplify 21? Absolutely not. So step 1 is done. Eliminate fractions. Well, some of you might not like to do that. Some of you do like to do it, but it doesn't matter. There are no fractions in this equation. Step 2, move all x squared terms to one side and all other terms to the other side. Now, let's pull up and park here for a second and talk about this. When I say an x squared term, I mean this right here. See, some of you might think the 3 is not part of the term. Of course it is. Hey guys, what divides an expression up into terms? Do you remember? What divides an expression into terms? Positives and negatives. So if you had 3 plus x squared, that would be 2 separate terms. This would be a constant term. That means there's no variable with it. This would be a constant term over here. This would be an x squared term, okay? But you do not have a positive or negative between the 3 and the x. It's multiplying. So this is one term. I don't care if it was like this. I don't care if you had 3x squared, b squared, c, d, x, y, c to the 4th, mp. If all of these are multiplying together, then that's one term. That is one whole term. Okay? Alright. So, move all x squared terms to one side and all other terms to the other side. We did that. Look, here's the left side of my equation. Here's the right side. It doesn't matter which side you move the terms, but I only see one x squared term, and it's over here. All the other terms are on the other side, are they not? Sure they are. Now, Mr. Earhart, can we put the x squared terms on the right side? Sure you could. It doesn't matter. But what I want you to see is right now, all of the x squared terms are on one side, and all of the terms are on the other side. Okay, next step. Divide by the x squared coefficient. Well, students, look, here's my x squared. What's the coefficient? 3. Remember, the coefficient is always the number that's being multiplied times that variable that we're talking about. Well, in this case, we're talking about the what variable? X squared. It says divide by the x squared coefficient. The what coefficient? X squared. So find your x squared term, and there's your coefficient. So divide both sides by your x squared coefficient, and you're left with x squared equals 7. Got it? Next, take the square root of both sides. Now, here's why we're going to take the square root of both sides. I know what x squared equals. X squared equals 7. Great. Awesome. That's fine. But that's not my goal. I want to know what x equals, not x squared. Okay? So if I have x squared, the only way to make that become an x is, and you're like, oh, Mr. Yard, I got an idea. I'll divide by x. Well, guys, if you divide by x, that will definitely leave you with an x over here. But if you divide one side by x, you gotta divide the other side by x, and that doesn't help you, does it? X doesn't equal a number. X equals 7 over x. That's just not gonna help. So the only way to take an x squared term down to an x term is to take the square root of it. So I'm going to take the square root of x squared. However, what you do to one side, you must do to the other side. Okay? So the square root of x squared is x. Now, if I asked you, forget this problem for a second. Everybody with me? Are you listening? Forget this problem for a second. If I asked you to find the square root of 16, what would you put for your answer? Hopefully 4, because 4 times 4 is 16. You would not put plus negative unless there's already a plus negative here. Got it? So a lot of times students are confused. Mr. Earhart, when do I put a plus minus? When you choose to insert the square root on your own, you must put a plus minus in front of the square root. Now look, does anybody see a square root in the original problem? No. There is no square root in the original problem. You are choosing to go like this and this. You are choosing to put it in. So when you do that, you must put a plus negative in front of the square root of 7, okay? The square root of x squared is x. So there's your answer. Now, with the calculator, if you type in square root of 7, you will get, well, I guess I better turn my calculator on first. That always helps, doesn't it? You will get 2.0 2.645751311. I'm going to round it to 2.65. So you have two answers, positive 2.65, negative 2.65, okay? Now, Mr. Earhart, do we leave our answer like this or this? It depends on the directions. If I ask you to write your answer in, are you listening? Are you writing this down? If I ask you to leave your answer in radical form, then you would leave your answer like this. If I say to answer with a decimal or whole number, then you type this into your calculator and you get this right here. So it all depends on the directions. I'll probably do both of these during your notes, just so you have an example of both kinds, okay? So make sure you know how to write both of these forms and make sure you know when to, okay? Let's try another problem. Step 1, simplify both sides of the equation. Well, guys, I cannot do any simplifying over here. There's no like terms. I cannot do any simplifying over here. Step 2, eliminate fractions if you like to. Well, it doesn't really matter if you like to. There are no fractions, okay? Alright, step 3, move all x squared terms to one side and all other terms to the other side. Now, I'm going to underline my x squared terms. There's one. I don't see any more. So I want this all by itself on one side. Okay, now it would be more work if you brought the x squared over 4x squared over here, and then your 40 over here. But you are more than welcome to do that. Okay, I'm not going to. Here's my x squared term. If I simply take this 12 and bring it over and make it a negative 12, then I have all of my x squared terms on one side and all of my other terms on the other side. Watch. Bring the 12 over, make it negative. And I'm left with 4x squared equals 28. Boom, I did it. Look at that. Okay. So, are all of my x terms on one side? Yes. Are all other terms on the other side? Yes, definitely. So step 3 is completely done. Now, let's divide by the x squared coefficient. Well, here's my x squared. The coefficient is 4. Let's divide both sides by 4. It's kind of a coincidence. We're going to get the exact same answer for this equation that we did for this one also. But that's okay, no big deal. So divide both sides by 4. These will cancel, leaving you with x squared equals 7. 28 divided by 4. Last step, take the square root of both sides. Well, the square root of x squared is, if you want to write it in there, you can. I'm not going to from here on out. The square root of x squared is x, but if you take the square root of one side, you must take the square root of the other side. And don't forget, you chose to insert the square root. It was not in the original problem, so you must put plus minus. So you can leave your answer like this, or you can put plus minus 2.65. If I ask you to write your answer in radical form, you would write this answer here. If I asked you to write your answer in whole numbers or decimals, then you would write your answer like this. Okay? Alright, moving on. If you feel confident enough to work ahead, please feel free to. If you don't, that's fine. Step 1, simplify both sides of the equation. Well, I can do nothing to this side. Those are unlike terms. You cannot combine them. I have unlike terms over here. You cannot combine them. There's no multiplication. There's nothing I can do. So step 1 is done. Step 2, eliminate fractions. Well, guys, I don't see any fractions anywhere, so I don't have to worry about that. No, I do. I do like to eliminate fractions. I will do that if I have a choice, but there are no fractions. Step 3, move all x squared terms to one side and all other terms to the other side. Now here's my x squared terms. Here and here. It does not matter which side you move them to, okay? Since I've been moving all of mine to the left side, I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to bring the x squared over here and make it a negative x squared. I'm going to bring the positive 2 over here and make it a negative 2. So I have negative x squared, negative x squared. That's negative 2x squared, right? Negative 1, negative 1. You owe me 1x squared, you owe me an x squared, you owe me 2x squareds. Equal positive 1, negative 2, that's negative this. Ask yourself the question, are all of my x squared terms on one side? Yes. Are all other terms on the other side? Yes. Step 4, divide by the coefficient. Well, my coefficient is -2, so I'm going to divide both sides by a -2. These will cancel, and I'm left with x squared equals. Now, a negative divided by a negative is positive. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2. If you want to put 0.5, you're more than welcome to. That's fine, okay? That's up to you. Now, did we divide both sides by the coefficient? Yes, we did. Last step, take the square root of both sides. Alright? The square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 1/2 is positive, negative, or plus minus. Square root of 1/2, that's a great answer. If I asked you to write your answer in radical form, you would leave your answer like that. If I asked you to write your answer as a decimal or whole number, then you would type into your calculator the square root of 0.5 equals 0.7071067812. I'm going to round it to 0.71. Okay, now if I don't tell you how to write your answer, then you can choose. You can leave your answer like this or like this. That is totally up to you. Okay? Alright, last problem, and that's it, guys. It's not going to be a very long video, okay? Alright, please copy this in your notes, the problem, and here we go. Step 1, simplify both sides of the equation. Well, guys, this is an x squared term. This is a constant term. I cannot combine them. There's nothing over here I can do. So there's nothing I can do. Eliminate fractions. Well, students, I like to eliminate fractions. That's no secret. So I'm going to multiply my denominators 2. I'm going to multiply the entire equation by 2. Now, a lot of students will say, oh, there's a negative here, so use a negative. I never do that. I think sometimes you have to multiply by a negative, okay? Sometimes you have to. But when you don't have to, it's really easy to make a mistake with your signs if you multiply by a negative or divide by a negative number. And again, sometimes you have to, but when you don't have to, don't, okay? So, 2 times -1/2 is just simply -1. 2 times 5 is positive 10. And 2 times 2 is 4. Now, if some of you just put a negative x squared, instead of putting the 1 there, that is totally fine. Nothing wrong with that at all. Okay, so step 1 was done. Step 2 is done. Step 3, move all x squared terms to one side. And all other terms to the other side, okay? Here's my x squared term here. I don't see any others, so I'm going to bring this 10 over and make it a -10. I'll be left with negative x squared. If you want to leave the 1 there, you can, that's fine. Equals -6. So, are all of my x squared terms on one side? Yes. Are all the other terms on the other side? Yes. Now, divide by your coefficient, okay? Now, some of you have the 1 right here. Third time's a charm. Let's try this again. Some of you have the 1 right here. So you know you're going to divide both sides by a -1. That's fine. Others of you just have a negative sign. Well, look, guys, it might be beneficial. It's up to you. You can say this if you want to. Just like in a linear equation, if you have negative x equals -6, you can say, if negative x equals -6, then x equals 6, right? And that's fine. You can say the same thing here. If negative x squared equals -6, then x squared equals 6. That's fine. Or, if you want to, you can put the 1 in right here, and then divide both sides by a -1, okay? Either way is fine. You're left with x squared equals 6. A negative divided by a negative is positive, and 6 divided by 1 is 6. Check. Now take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is x. Now you're choosing to put the square root in, so don't forget your plus minus. The square root of 6 is positive negative square root of 6. Okay? Now the other answer, of course, would be positive negative 2.449489743. I'm going to round that to 2.45. And there we go. If I ask you to write your answer in radical form, you would leave it like this if I asked you to write your answer as a whole